Hi guys, it's Harry from GRM Digital. I hope you're all well. I'm the Business Development Manager here and I've been invited to take part in one of our podcasts. Today's podcast is a really interesting subject, so it's off the back of a tender that we were involved in. And one of the key questions that came up within this tender is how do you define the success of your project? So me and the team, we felt that it'd be a really interesting subject to do a podcast about. So I really hope you enjoyed today's content. With that, I'd like to pass it over to Nej and Rob to introduce the subject in a little bit more detail.
Thank you, Harry. Very, very interesting question, and I think it's a question that applies in many contexts. It's a very loaded question as well. How do you define the success of a project? And I think that the success of a project looks different from the various perspectives of the different stakeholders that a project impacts. I think broadly, there's the way in which I would address that is I would say that there's two different things to look at. One is the actual deliverable and the success of the deliverable. Does that deliverable achieve the objective that was set out at the outset? And the other one is the actual project life cycle itself. Mm-hmm. Has that been successful? And how do you, what defines whether that's been successful or not? Would you agree with that, Rob?
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, you answered the question on a recent tender, didn't you? So
we do tenders all the time and we get asked a lot of repetitive, monotonous questions, but this time this question really stood out because it made us think, how do we define the successful project? And actually putting this down on paper and having to document that answer, I think it was a great question, and it really forced us to actually say, well, how do you differentiate between what's a successful project and what's not a successful project?
Well, I would say it was actually good for that question to be put to us for once, rather than someone coming to us with a brief saying this is what will define a successful project, which in many ways comes across as, we've had it before where defining a successful project might be just being on budget, when in reality we know that it's much harder than that, isn't it? Especially when you think deeper into the target audience who might be using a website or something like that.
Yeah, so, and I think you've touched on one area there, but going back to the other area, I think it's very much in line with the conversations that we sometimes force at the outset of engagements and projects that we do with our clients. And one of the key questions that we always ask is how are we going to measure the success of this website or application or portal, depending on what kind of engagement it is. And we have an entire workshop that talks about that because it's a very thought-provoking discussion that actually forces us to say, right, let's define some metrics that are going to clearly represent if those metrics are moving in the right direction. They're going to clearly represent that what we have built here has been successful. It's a way in which we as an agency also guarantee our success to some extent, because if we agree clear metrics and we know exactly what those metrics are and what our focus is going to be and by what measurements the success of our implementation is going to be measured, then we can, with a level of confidence, influence that and clearly demonstrate an improvement in those objectives. That's why it's really important to select measurable KPIs that derive from high-level business objectives that we can then clearly demonstrate through a user journey and various analytics around that.
I would say, obviously, the key point for me you've just mentioned there's the high-level business objectives, because obviously in large organisations this might be a project that's run by just one small segment of that. What they're trying to achieve with that project has got to be it's got to be part of an overall bigger picture as well. So that's why in the workshops we're always trying to get like C-suite people from these organisations involved, so that they can have an input into what sort of metrics and KPIs they think we should be measuring.
taking from what you've said, I think that the message that I'm getting is to take an analytical approach to measuring those metrics. Now, in your experience, we specialise within the membership and NFP space. In your experience, Rob, are there any key performance indicators or any commonalities within the key performance indicators that you could group together, which somebody who is trying to define the success of a project could consider?
Yeah, that could be, I'll give you an example. I mean, you touched on the membership sector. For them, that could be improving the value that their website brings to their members, in which case that could just be having them on the website for a longer period of time. So time on page, how often they're engaging with certain pieces of content, how many pages they're viewing before they leave the website, how many login sessions they're getting on the on a login area that they might have, training courses attended online. All these sort of things are amazing metrics which sort of do all come together to add to that overall goal of, let's just say, the higher level business objective is to increase value for members. So you can see how that sort of like transpires down into them smaller metrics, which the most important thing we can easily track online. So
another simpler example, let's say an example that might apply to an e-commerce organization. The business owners or the senior management are going to come to a meeting with, we're not selling enough online, we need to make more money, our website's not generating enough revenue. That will then translate down to, okay, we need to get more transactions, we need to get more completed searches, we need to drive more relevant traffic to the site, we need to, I don't know, get more catalog downloads, whatever. But the high level objective is always just very unspecific. Well, it's specific about what the business needs, but it's not related to how the business is going to achieve that. If we go and implement a solution that then clearly demonstrates, right, the level of traffic you've gotten up until now has been here, so that becomes a KPI. We continuously want to do various activities that are going to increase that level of traffic. At the same time, we look at the amount of transactions, we look at increasing the amount of completed transactions, we look at things like average basket value, and we look at increasing that, and what those things define for us is key functionalities and areas of focus. So for example, for increasing the basket size, well, it's all about categorization products and recommending the right products to the right users through their business, through their journey, so that you encourage them to buy more. And then once the project has gone live, that's the time when we can actually continually look at those KPIs and do continuous improvements. And what we would expect to see in any of these scenarios, as long as those numbers are clear, is a consistent improvement on all of those KPIs that we keep influencing and driving forward.
It's really interesting. A question that came to mind as I was listening to you both there was, especially for our viewers and our listeners within membership in particularly, who may be looking at a project at the moment and the success of it, are there any key challenges or common challenges that occur within membership in our experience that we could share with our viewers today that might help them when planning a project and the success of that project?
Well, so before answering that question, what I think would be useful is we've talked about defining the success of what we're implementing, right? So how is the solution going to be either successful or not successful? I think it'd be useful just to reiterate the other aspect of success, which is the project life cycle. Okay. So I think it's important to recognize one factor that applies to every project in any industry. So every project has three key constraints, right? You have your need, what you're actually building, you have a budget, and you have a time frame. Now, what we always say to our clients is, look, on on any project, we can guarantee 2 of those 3 constraints. We can guarantee to meet or fulfill 2 of those 3 constraints, but there always has to be some flexibility on one of those constraints. So, for example, if an organization has a fixed budget and they need to be live because of a key event within their industry by a certain date, then there has to be some flexibility in the actual deliverable. So in a case like that, we might do what we call a Moscow matrix, where we develop the fundamental functionality that's critical, and the rest of the functionality becomes a best endeavor as long as it doesn't impact the budget or the time frame of that delivery. So a lot of the times, we get inexperienced teams coming to us and saying, yeah, it's got to be on budget, on time, and in scope. But to actually expect all 3 of those things on a project, and that's the only way that you're going to determine that as a successful project, is to set yourself up for an unsuccessful project.
Okay.
So I think it's also important to look at how are we going to look at that implementation life cycle to define that element of success.
I think, like you say there, it's interesting that, the amount of briefs that we come across that have that as the definition of success, like the time frame and the budget, when you can almost see that they've not thought on a deeper level in terms of what this project, let's just say it's a website, might mean for their members, So I think we do get some strange looks when in the first initial question we come at them with is, how do you define the success of the website, for example? And it's almost like they haven't planned for that question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right.
Which is it's funny when you look at the scope of these briefs as well. So,
And why do you think that is? Within the membership space, is there a particular reason or a set of reasons that have contributed towards that being the case, or is the industry slightly behind the early adopters?
So I wouldn't say it's a membership specific problem. I'd say it's a general marketing and digital marketing problem. Right. That's a historical problem, right? And one of the things that for me is a pet hate is opinions, right? Opinions are something that everybody's got, and a lot of the time organizations will get a group of people around the table, and that could be a talented, experienced group of people that will make a decision about, oh, I like that, or I think that will work, or that would be cool, whatever. The fact of the matter is that if you're defining success based on the opinions of a group of individuals, but you're not defining metrics on how you're going to measure that, success, then you're going to appear successful in the eyes of some, appear unsuccessful in the eyes of others. It's so why this question is really important and thought-provoking is what we try to get away from is an opinion, right? We might build an awesome solution that's actually exceeding the expectations in terms of deliverables for all the stakeholders, but then you might get some team member or a manager that comes along and makes comments on, I don't like the look of that. Right. Well, by then bringing them back to, okay, what's the purpose of that? Well, look, that purpose has been fulfilled and exceeded. It kind of, in a very polite way, negates their opinion in that way.
Okay. I'd also say as well, not going to, by sort of when they come at you with a proposal, it's defining the success based on them 3 fundamentals thatNej mentioned. I think a lot of it's down to maintaining trying to maintain a bit of control, because in a way they are engaging with a third party to come in and help them with this project. So yeah, and I think in many ways they've got that opinion in-house of what they think the website should be, so they'll come in with a list of very specific requirements and sort of maintain control by saying, this is what we want, the success needs to be on budget, on time and within scope. When in reality they're not really thinking of the bigger picture and using external assistance on, you know, and I guess our experience in using, you know, working with membership organisations to define the success, which, I would say that's why the question when we ask it is a bit of a funny one.
A statement we categorically make that goes all hand in hand with that question, and that would be my advice to anybody out there undergoing any sort of a digital project. If you can't measure it, don't bother doing it.
Okay.
So defining the success then, in your experience, and as like obviously working on projects a lot longer than us two have.
Even though I'm kind of just as young as the two of you,
So if you're looking at putting together like an RFP at the moment, what tips would you give then, so as not to be too specific with your answers when it comes to success, or how would you define success?
So I think that, I think the example that we gave was a great question to put across in a tender, right? Mm-hmm. What we don't like to see is tenders that are too restrictive, mm-hmm. that are too focused on defining the success metrics for the agency, and in hand in hand disabling that agency from truly adding the value that they are there to add. So I think that what's important is to communicate the high level business objectives, mm-hmm. To explain the reasoning and the drivers behind that project, mm-hmm. and to leave it to the agency to actually advise on how best to demonstrate the success of that project. As far as the constraints are concerned, in terms of project delivery, that's common for everybody. You've got time frame, you've got need, you've got budget. Yeah. Any organisation, any agency that comes to you and says they can guarantee all three, mm-hmm. They're full of crap, right? Okay. There's no way that anybody can guarantee that, because, for example, I don't know, mid-project there might be a new browser version released that requires extra time. There might be a new device created by Apple with a screen size that's previously been unsupported and now we need to cater for. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of unforeseeables within our industry. That's why choose what two constraints are critical to you. Aim to get those two constraints locked in and clarify to the agency, so that when the agency plans the project implementation, mm-hmm. They plan it in a way where they are focused on a fixed deliverables of two constraints, but have some flexibility in that third constraint. Does that answer your question, or did I go on a tangent?
Bit of a tangent around the block, but
no, I think it's really useful for myself personally speaking, but also many of the listeners as well, to listen to you and your experience within the industry. I do have a question now. I'm not entirely sure it's specific to our subject, but I will ask it because it's come up in a lot of conversations that I've had with prospects. Now, when trying to define the success of a project, in many cases it is a web transformation project that a lot of these organisations are doing. Now, in many cases, a lot of organisations, a stumbling block for them is selecting the right technology. So making sure that the CMS that they've selected is correct. And a common theme that we found is that many agencies have a technology preference in mind that they tend to push forward to their prospects. I understand that we take a completely different approach as a technology agnostic organisation, but what importance and significance does selecting the right CMS play in defining the success of a project?
It's a little bit of in a lot of people's minds, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg situation, right? Mm-hmm. Do you select an agency and allow them to select your product once they've defined your requirements, or do you select a technology and then find an agency that's comfortable in delivering with that technology? in our experience, we believe that technology should not drive the deliverables or the specification of those deliverables. We believe that we should always lead from defining the ideal solution from a user journey perspective, and that's not just external user journey, it's internal users, so the people that are actually responsible for managing that website. That's what we would always lean towards. But in some organizations, some scenarios where you've got for example, in large corporates that own multiple brands and multiple in multiple countries, and they've got a centralized IT team and a centralized development team where they're restricted to certain technologies and so on, it may be viable to go and select a technology that's going to be suitable to support the organization as a whole because of the unique scenario that centralized team is looking to fulfill, or the unique skill sets that they have. Both approaches can be valid. In terms of agencies having a preference, well, that's not a preference towards this is a suitable product for you, Mr. Client. It's a preference towards this is a product that we've got skills and it's easy for us to develop, and we've got a partnership, and we get a kickback from reselling this software, and we get partner status, etc. So I think a lot of the time, it's important to recognize the drivers behind an agency's recommendation. With that, there is one caveat that I'd like to put out there. A jack of all trades is a master of none. So even though our approach and objective is to be technologically agnostic, as in we will never enter a situation with already having a preferred choice of what technology we want to sell, we also can't be experts on every technology out there. So the way in which we've dealt with that approach is we continually look at what the key technologies are and try to cherry pick a couple of leading headless options, a couple of leading enterprise traditional CMS options, a couple of very flexible mid-tier options, and then maybe one or two open source options, and then make sure we've got team members and teams that are skilled up within those technologies so we can still deliver quality whilst not being married to a solution from the outset.
That's really interesting. That really does answer the question. Rob, what's your perspective on this?
Mine is, for me, I guess just worth saying, it's refreshing when an organisation comes to us and isn't married on a technology but is open to actually understanding what else is out there. There is always the option that an organisation could use two agencies, use one for the consultancy, and then find someone else to deliver the rest, which is an approach which we know has worked well in the past. So I guess, you don't want the technology to be determining the success of the project in any way. That's got to be like deeper business objectives that do that, and that should determine, based on a consultative conversation with experts in the CMS industry, what technology options you should then consider.
I think it's also important to say a couple of cliches, but one size does not fit all, which is an argument as to why you can't go into a conversation about a web project with a solution already in mind. However, it is also software, so there are multiple solutions to any particular challenge, right? Because it's software, we can get it to do anything, including make you toast in the morning, right? The question is how complex or how costly it will be to get that particular software to do what you need it to do. So there are multiple solutions to any challenge. So if there are criteria like we prefer a .NET technology because we've got a development team that's able to support that, or we prefer working in a cloud infrastructure because we don't have any servers and everything else hosted in cloud and things like that. Those can be criteria that are specified at the outset of a project, because that does not mean that we're restricted as to the recommendations. It just means that we're one step further in narrowing down the suitable options for that particular organization, because we want to fulfill all of their needs, right? Their operational needs,
Yep.
as well as their users' needs, as well as their overall business needs from whatever solution it is that we're building. But I think I think this has been an interesting topic to discuss. I think it's a great question that really stood out on a particular tender, and I hope that this discussion is going to trigger some more interesting questions from our audience that we can possibly dissect in our future discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, before we close off, Rob, have you got any additional comments to add on to what Ned just said?
I guess it'd just be good to summarise, wouldn't it, the key points very quickly. How do you go about measuring the success? For me, like, things I would look to do would be to include people at all levels of the organisation in asking that question. Be open to receiving outside consultancy from an agency that's probably been there, done it, and worked with organisations similar to yourself. And I think that's probably it from me. Nej, any quick ones?
For me, I think it's important again to differentiate the success of a project delivery and a success of the solution that's being delivered. I think that question needs to be taken into those two separate dialogues. And in reality, once you've defined those criteria in both of those remits, then success on the delivery and the success of the solution is what ultimately defines the success of the project.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both, gentlemen. Really appreciate that very, very much. And thank you for watching today's podcast as well. I hope you really enjoyed the subject. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Do leave any of your comments and thoughts in the comment section below, and like this video as well. From me and the whole team at GRM, thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you on another podcast in the coming weeks. Thank you.